For those of you that are visiting today, and based on the show of hands earlier, that was only 2, but maybe there's a couple of others of you. As a guest preacher, please don't judge the church on today's sermon. Come back at least one more time to hear Penny preach, who is a fantastic preacher and was one of my primary mentor and guide through the ordination process and clergy training. So to be here and to hear you call me colleague is humbling. For God so loved the world that she gave her only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. John 3:16. If you were like me and grew up in a conservative Christian community, that verse is triggering. You know, on the surface, it sounds comfortable and hopeful, but in the context I grew up in, it was really used and leveraged as a fear tool. Because if you don't believe, you're going to perish. And we're going to tell you what belief looks like. And do your best to do what we describe, or else you're going to perish. It's harsh, isn't it? And a little bit of inside advice. For those of you in this community that work with folks who are transitioning from fundamentalist or conservative Christianity and coming to liberal, progressive Christianity, and we share stories like that, try not to look so horrified. And I mean that sincerely, because one of the things that's difficult in our transition is if we're scaring you, we may not share as much as we need to. So just listen and appreciate the things that we've gone through, and then express your fear and outrage with others who would understand. But give us an opportunity to move in this new circle. It's helpful. Now, as most people over time, you don't stay connected and locked in to the group of people who raised you, that educated you in the early years. You expand. And over time, I learned that the word in that passage for world is actually cosmos. For God so loved the cosmos. Everything. All of it. And again, this was an exposure that I had in a literalist construct. So I started thinking, well, how are animals supposed to believe? My neighbor's cats, they're jerks. I don't see a lot of hope for them. But this notion that God's love was for the cosmos, this notion that God's love was expansive, boundaryless, found a home in me, in this tiny little corner of my gut. And it took root. But again, that mechanism of belief in, this belief in had to be in order for there to be this everlasting life. That belief in this other entity, this static construct that was laid out for me and others. The shackles of literalism are difficult to break. But that tension between the expansive and exclusive was difficult to navigate. Expansive, the cosmos; exclusive, believe or else. that internal conflict without language is something that many of us can relate to in a multiplicity of ways. And here's a little story that might help illustrate, and sometimes it's a little easier to use the story of childhood to explain a moment like that. And Mary Donovan Turner was a professor at Pacific School of Religion, a phenomenal professor. And her daughter, Erin, I had the chance of sitting with them at a wedding about a year ago, and I'd heard a story about Erin. And I asked them if I could have their permission to share their story and use their names. And since I just did use their names, they granted me permission. So Erin, when she was little, rode to school with a neighbor who was in the same class and was a boy, and the mom of the boy would drive the kids to school, and one of Erin's parents would pick them up and bring them home. Well, Erin was an athletic kid. She was fast and would win a lot of races at school. So one morning, as they're driving to school, the neighbor friend's mom says something to Erin that is akin to, you really shouldn't run so fast all the time. My kid's feeling bad because he's getting beaten by you. Could you slow it? Something akin to that. And Erin says, and she's little, she says, I don't really know what you're saying, but I know I don't like it. You know that feeling? So this idea, these competing notions of God's love being expansive and God's love being exclusive, I didn't like it. But I didn't really have language. I didn't know what to do with that dislike. So as my journey continued, I just tossed out literalism completely. Sort of like a banana gone bad. And I say that because I love bananas, but they do go bad, and you get rid of them or else it's not so good for you. A few years ago, while theologizing in isolation, so that's a phrase I totally made up. And I made it up in seminary and this is what it looks like. For those of you unfamiliar with theologizing in isolation, it's basically walking around in circles, mumbling incoherently in a repetitive manner in the hope something will break through. Those that have been to seminary are laughing because they understand. Now, there's also theologizing in community. Theologizing in community is basically doing the same thing with other people seated at a table, no one understanding what anyone else is saying, but still hoping something will break through. And if you want to take a field trip, go to the GTU and you'll see this happen all over the place. But a few years ago, while theologizing in isolation, I was purposefully pondering John 3:16, because the lingering sting of what I was raised with hadn't gone away. And as I was pondering this, and I was in fact pacing and mumbling to myself the verse, the passage, softly but audibly, what began to surface was believe in. Those two words, believe in. So in the growing up context, believe in was in a way like, sometimes Jorge and I are friends, sometimes we hang out, and he'll walk into the room and come up to the table. He's like, I'm here, everybody. Yo, stand up. Give me some respect. And so, the joke is we, kind of do this. There's that sort of believe in construct. And then there's I'm going to pick on Jorge again. There's times where, Jorge, your journey to ministry wasn't a straight line. Right? Just like mine wasn't clearly a straight line. But along the way, there were people that said, Jorge, I believe in you. I believe in you. You see how those two words can be drastically different in how they're applied. There's the believe in to this far-off, arbitrary notion that some people tell us we need to bow down and worship. And then there's this deep, divine connection where we see things in one another that maybe the other can't quite yet see in themselves, and we believe in them. We believe in them. So during that moment of mumbling to myself and pacing, I could hear God's voice in my heart saying, she believed in me. And I began to make connections of people that had believed in me along the way, that had helped me move from where I once was to where I could be. And one of those people is Penny. I remember our first conversation. It was in your office right here. I was pretty new. I was the new executive director at Home and Hope. Walked into your office, sat down, and we started chatting. And somewhere, I don't know that you used the words, Penny, but somewhere in that conversation, you expressed a belief in me. And I was at a personal and professional and spiritual crossroads, having transitioned from that conservative background into nothing, and then trying to find my way back, or even wondering if a way back was possible. And right away, you let me know that there was something there. And as my theologizing in isolation continued, I began to think about the connection between believing in and should not perish but have everlasting life. Could there be a connection? Now, all of you here can probably think of at least one person who believed in you when you thought no one else did. That person is probably very much alive in you today, even if their bodies are no longer here. Whosoever believes in shall not perish. But the difficulty is that believing is hard. Believing in is hard sometimes. When you look at the political climate in our country and in the world, right now, for me personally, believing in somebody who thinks differently, who talks about issues differently in ways that I find offensive and wrong, you ask me to believe in them, I'm going to struggle with that. But I wonder what's lost if and when I lose the ability to believe in a human being that I don't agree with. I wonder what's lost. And I think maybe we're getting a sense of what happens when that occurs. When we cease to believe in others because we don't agree with them. Now, I'd like to close with a little exercise. If you could take out your bulletins and something to write with. And this exercise gets us to one of the harder things about believing in, which is believing in ourselves is maybe the biggest mountain in this construct. So, looking through this, what I'd like you to do is go through, for God so loved the world, that he gave his only, cross out son, and put in a blank. And one more, so that everyone who believes in, cross out him, and put in another blank. Now, in the blanks, I'd like you to just write your first name. And for those of you that are comfortable doing this, let's read this out loud with your blanks filled in. For God so loved the world that she gave her only begotten, that whosoever believes in shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Friends, given the times that we live in, I believe that our belief in ourselves and one another holds the key to healing, restoration, and that bright future we're all striving for. Amen.